If you'd like to see exactly how I go from improvisation to finished piece of music, stick around, because I'm going to show you that exact process. I'll be making the demo track for a new VST I just helped create. Oh, that's so cool. And I'm just going to let you watch the process while I explain why I make certain decisions. I'm doing this because there are two prevailing philosophies that I see being passed around the internet whenever someone asks a question about how to write music. The first being, just learn all the music theory. And the second being, just do whatever sounds good, bruh. And I don't think either of those are very helpful. I prefer starting with a simple plan or a system, a framework that I can use to discover inspiration, to get inspired, so I don't have to sit around waiting for it to happen. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how I do that for free, in hopes that it inspires you to do something new and creative in your own music. I'm just going to start exploring the way that I like to explore and the way I typically teach, exploring harmonies and chord progressions, which is linearly. And I'll talk more about that as I do it. A couple things. You'll notice that I was exploring in a very limited way, and that's how I like to start off, is with intentional limitations that I set for myself. And I'm not entirely happy with that, but what you notice is I just got the whole phrase out in one go if possible. So rather than fussing over each individual move, I had certain parameters in place that limited the moves that I was making. I wanted to use mostly whole steps and half steps and move just one part, maximum 2 parts at a time. This is only a 3-part harmonization. By the way, this is the exact method that I teach in my upcoming composition clarity system, where I give you prompts and examples, assignments that allow you to start exploring without having to do any guesswork. If it's not out already, depending on when you see this, you can join the wait list for that below. Now that I have a rough idea of the shape of this phrase, if you notice, there's intentional repetition here to set up a pattern. And then I have a different shape here at the end to set up contrast or establish contrast. So establishing patterns and contrast in this way is very powerful. And the way you establish a pattern is you repeat it, which so many composers are afraid to do. But it's one of the most powerful devices that there is. Make something strong enough that it begs to be repeated, and then repeating it is not such a problem. One thing that I notice right off the bat is that I end on a similar harmony to where I began. And I'm not sure that's what I'm going to want to do, because that could be a telegraph that would spoil the repeat if I wanted to repeat this whole section. So I'm just going to listen to it again, and then I'm going to make refinements and adjustments. That's the compositional process as I listen. Happy with that? I'm happy with that. I like that D natural there. It's different than the first time. So we have the same material, but it ends slightly differently. And then we launch ourselves into something new. A prime, B, if I were thinking of this in sections. And if I were to loop this whole thing, do the loop test on it, which would tell me whether or not I telegraphed, I feel like I wouldn't spoil the repeat based on where I ended. Now, I don't love this right here because I'm sort of centering around these two notes in this particular part, and it makes it feel like it's not really going anywhere. It almost works because I'm leaping away, and so everything is expanding above that. The highest part is always going to feel like the most important part anyway, just acoustically. Higher notes or louder notes. So you see, I made this tiny adjustment right here just by dragging things around in the tiniest moves I can make. And that's sent me in a whole other direction. And you may notice I'm not worrying about staying within the confines of a key signature or a formula. What I'm worried about is creating a sense of harmonic freshness from one chord change to the next. And every time I move one of these parts, even slightly, I'm changing the chord. Another thing you'll notice that I'm doing is avoiding doubling at all cost, and that's because I only have 3 parts, and I want to explore the richest harmonic progressions possible. Anytime I double or have like parallel octaves, or even just octaves that aren't parallel, but just 2 of the notes are the same, or they're an octave apart, I've essentially eliminated one of my 3 voices. I've made the harmony thinner at that particular point. I'm going to keep this going like that so that they move together. There it is. I'm just going to hold that instead of rocking it back and forth. There's really no purpose to that motion. So I've just cleaned that up, and I've eliminated some of the unnecessary movement that wasn't really doing anything. Actually, I think was weakening this progression, this sort of chain of suspensions. I really like the way that this bottom part works now. It is a bit more chromatic, which means it just moves in half steps, just tiny little changes. Again, what's the smallest change I can make that'll have the biggest impact on the harmony? So I think we have a solid progression now. I'm pretty happy with this. I'm going to improvise in a bass line that I think will work with this first part of this phrase. The second half of that didn't work even remotely. You know what? I don't like that. There's a doubling right there. It's kind of unnecessary, so I'm just going to hold the F. Now I think I have a strong enough main idea that I can start to flesh things out from a production standpoint. I really like this sort of nostalgic. And I'm just playing with the mod wheel as I play that, and that's kind of cool. Now that I have more complex harmonies happening in my linear parts, I'm going to have to make adjustments to this arpeggiated thing. I can't just latch an arpeggiator and let it run. It also becomes, like, arpeggios are just blocked chords, right? That's essentially what I'm doing here. I can go in and make adjustments as needed to make them fit with the harmonies that are happening underneath. That's what you have to do when you have more complex harmonic movement. Kind of like when I improvised in the very first idea that I went back and refined. Not super worried about all the notes just yet. Just get something in, then you can make adjustments to make it fit. I think I've found something that will work better by avoiding this sort of, sometimes it's D flat, sometimes it's D natural in the progression below. I'm just going to avoid that entirely. Any Ds of any variety in my ARP, and that will eliminate the need for me to have to make as many adjustments. So you see, as I get more adventurous with the harmonies, a lot of those didn't work towards the end, but they did in this repeating section here.
After unsuccessfully trying to make this work for about a half hour, Jameson eventually abandoned the ARP almost entirely. He then grew hangry, so he decided to go make himself a sandwich.
I just had lunch, and I've made a couple of changes, had a couple of ideas in stepping away from this piece, which is maybe something in and of itself that we should take note of. I changed the arrangement a little bit so that this ARP was not existing all the way through it, and I think I'm going to do away with this ARP entirely and have something more sporadic that can be more like ear candy, even though I kind of hate that term, just to punctuate things with the production while this linear thing is happening underneath it. The other thing that I want to do is come up with a really ethereal introduction that is based on this sort of movement from this figure at the very beginning. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, sort of the accent on the 2 there. So I just improvised and haven't even recorded yet this idea here with this very ethereal sound. I think that's the one right there. So now what I'm going to do is select everything, move it over, give myself room to put this at the beginning, and then we can kind of tidy things up from there. Now that I have that, I think it's going to tie this whole thing together. I'm just going to delete this ARP because I'm going to do something else inspired by that ARP idea, but not exactly. So what I've done here is given myself lots of space. There are interesting things happening harmonically, but there's still a ton of space for me to do interesting things with the sound design because I'm trying to demonstrate what this plugin can do. I also ate some almonds for lunch, and now I have almond dust caught in the back of my throat. What if I just experimented the way that I experiment with a synthesizer, and that's grab a knob and start turning it rhythmically to see what happens? I think I want a drone running through this entire thing. Please don't make fun of the way I say drone. I know it's weird. I'm from Mississippi. Sounds like an angry hornet. Yeah, a little pitch bend action there. That could be cool. And I have rendered that out into audio so that I can chop it up, compress all of the trash and that kind of things, and just do interesting things with it from a sound design standpoint. Perhaps, as you can tell, I'm wearing a different shirt, which means it's a completely different day. And the reason for that is I came back to this track last night with the intentions of finishing it and recording it, and of course, promptly forgot to turn on my camera. Although a lot of that was just production and automation work, which was a bit tedious anyway, and I'm just going to walk you through sort of the final arrangement and production of this thing, reminding us what we did compositionally to get to this point. The whole thing, if you recall, started with this improvisation that was created using a very defined set of limitations. Small, stepwise, linear movement instead of thinking of blocked chords jumping from one to the next. And that formed the foundation for this entire thing. Even the introduction was born out of this very tight, close together linear harmony. Also took inspiration from the different parts coming in at different times that I had going on here. And remember, I was thinking mostly about the overall shape before I went in and did all of the detail work of just moving things around one voice at a time, the tiniest moves that I could make that would lead me to fresh new harmonies that I might not have explored otherwise. I did end up finding a sort of counter melody that could work and sort of fit in the cracks and soar over the top of this entire thing, and we'll get into how I created that in just a bit. Remember how much time I spent working this idea out. And that might have seemed like a waste to you at the time. It's like, well, just get a chord progression out and move on. I think what we see is when you spend the time developing an idea that's really strong on the front end, it sort of helps out the entire process and makes the entire arrangement go more smoothly. You're saving your time on the back end rather than just cramming a bunch of random stuff in there, depending on whatever sounds good, bruh. Don't immediately abandon your ideas. Sometimes it's just one or two adjustments that you need to make, and that is composition. That's what differentiates it in my mind from improvisation. I could have left it as the initial improvisation, but by trying different things, moving things around, I ended up in a stronger place that I liked better just by making a few small adjustments. It's largely trial and error, which is why I left some of that in of me choosing things that I didn't like so that you could see that that's part of the process. And remember, if you want to learn a step-by-step system or process for how you can start to write in this linear style yourself through very detailed exercises and assignments, I do have a new composition method coming out very soon. You can join the waitlist below if it's not out already by the time you watch this. Because this is largely a showcase of a virtual instrument that I created with John and the team at Somerville. There is a lot of production detail that I put into this to try to show it in the best light possible because it can do so many things and it's so inspiring to use. Remember the organ ARP idea? Well, I ended up abandoning that initial ARP entirely, but I liked the idea of having an ARP and it inspired me to do something else. And you can see that a lot of the arrangement and production process is a subtractive process, so I'll just improvise things in, render things out so that I have more control over the reverbs and things and can carve out more space. And it's largely about making these parts more conversational with each other. So if I go over to this middle section and play just the ARPs together. Obviously, that's going to make a lot more sense when everything else is in, but you can see how I'm trying to create as much space as possible. Any ambient instrument like this that has a lot of reverb baked in and then applied externally as well, they take up a ton of space. That's why I render things out, so I can render out the reverb, print the reverb to the track, and then just have complete silence, and then it sounds like the parts are having conversations with each other. I can move them around in the stereo field, just a lot more clarity. And I have a ton of automation. This is part of the reason why you didn't see a lot of what I did. There's so much automation happening here. And that's just tedious detail work, but it makes such a huge difference. Using some of the modulators that we now have in Cubase, thank God, I've just got certain parameters dancing around a little bit. And that makes such a big difference in the sound, just adding a little bit of movement. I've also hard panned these. You can't really tell it here because I've used a plugin to do so where I've kind of summed things to one channel. And that's just to allow these things to be even more conversational and just take up their own dedicated smaller space rather than taking up the entire stereo field, the entire frequency spectrum. Because you'll also notice that I do quite a lot of just chopping off the lows and even the highs in some cases to kind of bandpass these things so that they fit together well. And you can do a lot of that within the plugin itself because we have a bandpass filter right here in the effects section. I created a couple of drones with the instrument. Once again, I rendered those out so that I have more control over them. Just textured organ tape loop drones you have at your disposal now, at your fingertips. This is the kind of stuff that I would spend hours doing with actual tape loops. Kind of nice to have it in a plugin now, honestly. The only two elements in this that are not directly the organ plugin. The bass, I'm just using phase plant, just a bass preset with a nice attack on the front end. We'll get to that lead in just a second. That's the counter melody that I was talking about. My original bass was the organ, the pedals, but I wanted to distort it like crazy, as I often do. So I added some distortion, some wave shaping, which I used this Melda Productions plugin quite often for kind of aggressive wave shaping, and then I can always filter it down as needed later. So this is the organ, and I've shaved off the lowest lows because phase plant is handling a lot of that just to clean up the low end a bit. So together, you hear all of that crackle and buzz in the high end of that bass part from the wave shaping. Everything else besides that phase plant bass is from the organ in some way. I kind of cheated, if you want to call it that, a little bit by using the sampler built into Cubase to sample one of these drones that I had made over here. And that's what's making that crazy lead sound, because I've also, you guessed it, wave-shaped the bejesus out of it. And then I also ran it through a little black hole reverb just for extra space. And in order to have more control and create more gaps, you can see the subtractive elements in here once again. I just rendered it all out with the reverb printed. I bring in the left side as well. I think I put a little bit of micro shift on that channel because I just duplicated it. I didn't track it in twice. Changed the EQ a little bit so that they don't sound exactly the same and create phase issues. And then also this micro shift from Sound Toys creates a little bit of detuning and slight delay so that these things feel a little wider when they're panned hard right and left. They don't just sound like a direct copy of each other. I also still wanted it to be right channel dominant, so I made the left channel sort of echo a little bit quieter. So that section, I initially started right here with the pads. I think at one point I just accidentally muted the pads while I was working on the lead. And then I realized that I needed an iteration of that without the pads at all because of the clarity that that produces. And that allowed me to do other little ear candy type stuff with the arps, which I have automated. It's not just a solid arp playing all the time. I've drawn in some volume automation here. Just lots and lots of detail work that I think is important to point out and not just gloss over, because that's what makes a huge difference in taking something from pretty good to really good. And you'll hear how there's so much clarity and space in this first iteration because I've removed everything except the outer parts, and that leaves me a lot of space for all of this ear candy. Once the pads come back in, I don't do so much ear candy stuff up here anymore because more of the frequency spectrum is now occupied. Basically in arc form, so this introduction material comes back at the end, and I've done a lot of, once again, kind of detail work in making this noise sort of come in as a riser here. Let's just listen to this. So I have these reverse samples that are just kind of punctuating the gaps. Now, the other big reason why I used Cubase's sampler for this is to get that portamento, gliding from note to note, because I really liked that effect, and it's a really unique effect to hear with this sound source. Sampling and resampling samples from a sample library or sample instrument, incredibly powerful. And I've done the same thing up here with this little delay feedback, which was taken from my ARP, which was made with the organ plugin. So everything is either directly or indirectly in some way, with the exception of the phase plant bass, from that plugin. I found this an incredibly inspiring process because it's sounds that I like to use, obviously, because I helped create this plugin. So I hope that you find it as inspiring as I have. It was a lot of fun to put together. I would like to thank John and the team at Somerville for helping out and actually making this a reality. If you're interested in getting your hands on these sounds and this instrument as well, I'm going to link the Genesis Pipe Organ in the description below, along with the wait list or link to that new composition method or system that I'm creating.